I'm Jay from Real Street Performance. Today I'm here with Hans Brady. Hans Brady is one of the staff here, and he's going to tell you a little bit about himself before we move forward with this project.
I manage our website, so anything to do with the realstreetperformance.com website, that's all me. I'm the guy that's helping everyone.
Yeah, so if you make an online store order and you have a question, or if there needs to be a change to the order, you've dealt with Hans. He's here kind of entrenched in the background. He's one of the two guys that are on staff here that know a lot about SR20 engines. And because I've spent the majority of my time involved in other engines, the SR20 is something that I don't know a lot about. This particular engine is shipped to us for a restoration project, but we don't have any history on the engine, so we're going to take it apart, see what it looks like inside, make sure that everything is done well. That way when they do get this car back together and they're to the point of enjoying the fruits of their labor and enjoying the project, the engine is trouble-free. Externally, Hans, looking at this engine, are there different families of the SR20? Can you identify anything about this engine that is kind of a redeeming quality or something that you could help label its generation, or are they just one SR20?
There's unfortunately just way too many to keep track of, but this one's the most common. This is a S13. This would have been probably a red top, which was the more common rear-wheel drive factory turbo SR. So that means that you have no variable cam, no variable valve timing. It would be called a straight cam SR in Europe. The later revision, you would see the hump on the valve cover for better baffling, notch for variable cam timing, and those cars make a little bit more, but the VCT starts to fall apart at like 400 horsepower. So this is actually better for performance. It's just a little bit simpler.
So the red top and black top, that's in that variable cam house?
No, so red top versus black top is actually two different S13 engines. The red top was the original. The red top versus black top mechanically, not a lot changed, but the ECUs changed quite a bit. The black top would have been found in your like Type X S13, so your higher trim model. Okay. So you just get a little bit more in the pedal, basically.
Okay, cool. Well, let's get this thing apart and we can take some measurements and see what's going on. It is said to be rebuilt. The silicone all looks fairly fresh, but there is carbon in the exhaust port, so the engine has been run at some point, unless they didn't clean the head. So let's get it apart and see what's going on. See, unlike the JZs and the Hondas, they don't have a spray bar, so the camshaft lobe is just splash lubricated. So the oil's shedding out of the journal for the camshaft. What gets pulled up around the bucket is then splashed around the lobe to lubricate the lobe. And these have an actual oil spray bar, so there's oil pressurizing onto the lobe. And that should offer you better protection because you have more oil present.
So this is your factory SR rocker. This is a cast piece, so it's pretty fragile. That's why these shatter all the time. You'll notice that one side is as cast, meaning no relief cut here, and one side has been relief cut. This side locates into this guide shim, and it's called a guide shim because it essentially has rails. It's like it has gutters on it. And then your standard shim right here is flat. So the combination of these two does hold the rocker straight, but you know, you could always hold it better. So doing what's called a dual guide mod is just putting one of these here, and you would cut the rocker arm to accept it, and from there, rather than grinding down the rocker, which essentially has another rocker surface on the bottom of it, you can actually take these, if this one will come out for me, and you can machine the back of this down to match the thickness of this shim you take out on this side. So that way you get a level rocker that's held in with two guide shims instead of a guide shim and a shim.
Do you think that the majority of this engine's problem was the fact that it wasn't a USDM engine, so it didn't get the same development?
Yeah.
The rate of development that the Hondas got?
Well, it was also produced less. Even overseas, they built less of these than they did Honda EGs and EKs. You know, there's a lot more B and K series floating around with a lot more people having ideas about it than the SR.
Yeah, the Honda stuff is really, it's so plentiful for the most part. You know, only like exotic engines like the F20C Yeah, those we didn't get a lot of.
So these are 2 bolts that every first time SR person forgets.
Down there.
These go all the way through the cylinder head into the oil pump front cover. And they're basically here to pinch the gasket at the front. You're fighting the head gasket being glued on because these things weep oil. Well, it's because the oil pump is part of the deck surface, but people will only send their block out to get decked, so then the oil pump's too tall. So the FSM calls for RTV here.
Oh.
So these are your oil returns out of the cylinder head that are packed with scuzz. This engine also wasn't honed. I think these are standard bore pistons.
Huh.
I'm actually extremely surprised that you got the head off with the studs in still.
Why?
Usually over time, because it's an aluminum block and things just get hot and stay places, you go to pull the head off and it gets stuck halfway because it's a pretty long run for the stud. That plus the time and chain guide will usually fight you pretty bad.
It has a really nice uniform print when you look at the surface of the gasket as you go around the cylinder.
So you get a little bit of fire ring kind of tech with it. It's nice. And you can see it actually seals around the cylinder really well. You can feel it. It creates like a little step deck.
Yeah, the print is really nice. So there's a couple things that are happening here at the front of the engine on the oil pump. And if you look, the oil pump is higher than the block deck on one side of the oil pump and lower than the other. So you have this game where if the front cover oil pump assembly is not doweled, its location is not fixed. And some care should be taken to balance the relationship between the front cover and the internal clearance of the oil pump, because if you move this too much, then you don't have anything that's locating the oil pump and you're going to have clearance issues inside the oil pump. But this is not a great situation. And also these blind holes on the front cover, there's silicone down in these holes, so you're going to want to clean those out with a bottom tap and or thread chaser, and you don't want to remove material, but you want to get all the silicone out. That way when you put the bolt back in there, if you have a bunch of silicone, it can act as kind of a hydraulic and crack the casting. So that goes for any blind hole on your engine block. If there's silicone nearby, be sure you're cleaning that old silicone out as you go back to a reassembly process. So this is what I was just talking about. You have a black silicone, but then you also have a clear silicone. So this clear silicone is from previous build, and it essentially adds length to the bolt. Now, it is squishy, but if you get enough silicone down in that hole and you tighten the bolt, it will crack around the bolt. So this is someone rebuilding in the past and not cleaning out the bolt holes before they reassemble, because again, you have two different types of silicone on the same couple of bolts.
Oh man, the gray RTV, or no, it's just the aluminum.
It's cute with the little doors. It's a nice part.
Yeah, no, Gretty was pretty ahead of the curve on that. I found that the baffling on these was pretty good too. Like you got an upper and a lower baffle in both oil pans. The only downfall to these is this oil pickup. The factory pan is this size, and you only have about a 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch between the pickup and the pan. Okay. And the pan is steel, so if you hit something, it pushes the pan up. And you'll see on a lot of factory SR pans, there's an oval kiss mark on it. The cool thing about the cast pan is once you're building a race car and you're thinking about hitting a curb or dropping a tire and going off track and smacking the oil pan,
it cracks.
It shatters. You go from having all the oil pressure in front to 0, whereas this will be a slow, whimpering death of just choking the engine for oil. So if you have a fail-safe or you have an AccuSump or something, you know, you can play around that a bit better. That was the way that the SR...
There's a second baffle down there under this one.
Yeah. Yeah, so you got trap doors to stop sloshing. You also add about 1.5 quart of capacity with that pan.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, and then you have this, which stops the oil from running up into the back of the pan.
Who makes that nowadays? Is that pan still
available? So you can still buy that from Gretty. So this is a S13 oil pickup, which makes sense. It's an S13 engine. Okay. But remember how we were talking about this factory steel pan getting smushed into this and you don't pick up any oil? Yeah. On the 14 pickup, which they revised, there's a notch cut out on either side of this so they can pull oil in from the side as well. Direct bolt-on upgrade. That's cool. Yeah.
Man, this silicone game is not going great. This engine also has 2 different types of silicone on the same oil pan right now. So there's like a shiny black and an ultra black.
Ah. It's got I-beams in it.
Yeah, it's all Crower rod.
Huh.
The Crower stuff's no joke, man. That family has been building speed parts, I think much longer than I've been alive. They're like triple OG speed parts family.
I think this is my first SR girdle that doesn't have a kangaroo stamped on it.
What's up with the kangaroo?
They're just on all of them. There's just a kangaroo.
Yeah?
Yeah. You know who you could probably ask about that that'll back me up?
Who?
Andrew from Motive.
Yeah?
Yeah.
This bearing's been run.
Let me see.
See that particulate embedded in the face? And then the back has vibration present. You're not going to get that from just putting the bearing in the rod. This isn't just happening.
Is that an A bearing as well? Like a OE style bearing?
Yeah. Some of this you could say is particulate, like debris. But this little abrasion where they mark from where, I don't know. I'd have to say it'd been run. Maybe run and then took apart for some problem and then put back together because the bearing has been run. So I think it was run and then they screwed something up and then they went back into it, cleaned everything up, put it back together. Well, cleaned it as much as they cleaned it. This thing wasn't going to go very far. There's no end play in the pin, so the pin is stuck in the piston right now. It's, you know, full floating pin. The pin is free to move in the piston and the rod. And if you don't have enough clearance between the circlips or spiral locks that are holding the piston pin assembly together, the pin should move back and forth a little bit in the piston. Enough that you can feel it with your fingertips, and the pin should rotate freely. And this thing is stuck and doesn't move. Yeah, so this pin floats. So you see this little bit of movement back and forth. Can you see that? And then the pin, if I jam my pinky in there, I can rotate that pin. It's free to rotate. This one also moves and is free to rotate. However, this pin that has a different marking on it than the other pins is not free to rotate. There's also particulate that's jammed up. See this stuff? Where is this going? None of this is good. That's metal. So this may already be in trouble in a short amount of time. And if you have a wrist pin failure where the piston can no longer rotate the pin, you shortly after they're going to end up with a bunch of parts in the oil pan and pieces. So we'll pop that apart and take a look at it, but it's always the little things that ruins an engine.
Oh my goodness. They used plenty, didn't they? On the O-ring and everything.
Yeah, this is kind of a pet peeve of mine. Don't put silicone on O-rings. It's just a mess. The O-ring does its job by itself. That's why it's there. It's actually really nice to remove main caps that way instead of prying them around. You can see some abnormal wear. See the crank is touched here and there. It's just whipping around in there. What's up with that pump drive gear?
It's not installed fully. It looks like the Woodruff key's broken. And that's not an interference fit part. That should just slide on relatively easy.
It's kind of stuck. I'm going to knock it around a little bit, see if we can get it to move. Ooh. Yeah, the thrust is wrecked on this thing. Look at the crank itself.
Oh,
Feel how deep
oh,
it's like worn away. Crank's junk.
Damn.
So the thrust surface on the crankshaft is ruined, and there was a time where you would bring it to a crank shop and you could have the thrust welded and then they'd regrind it. And if this were a really exotic crankshaft that were hard to find, you know, pick some World War II era Alfa Romeo thing that you just can't get another crank for, you may try to repair the crank. But engine like this, where there's aftermarket or OEM support of a crank, you throw the crank away. But this damage here was done before the engine went back together. So this engine wasn't long for this world. It was gonna die again, for sure. So our thrust bearings look like the outer surface has been removed, but this is not wear present on the bearing. This bearing has this one has nothing as far as measurable wear, and then this one just has a couple light scuffs where it's just considered would be normal. So this engine was not run long, but this side of the thrust surface, the side that the clutch is not pushing on, is intact. But if we look at the other side, it is wasted. And this discoloration here on the crank, where the crank is a little bit dark through this area, the heat getting driven into the part, and there's a lot of wear here. This surface is down not 100 thousandths of an inch, but it looks like it's down probably 50 or 60 thousandths of just material that's been ground away. So this crank is not going to be used again. So we noticed when we took the engine apart that one of the piston pins wasn't moving freely. And there's a fair share of aluminum particulate on each piston. Some of that particulate had lodged itself between the piston pin and the piston, causing that pin to be frozen. And the particulate has drug up and down the bores, scratching the bores up. And if you look at some of the pistons, there are drag marks that are coming directly out of the clearance that he ground into the piston to clear the piston squirter. You know, if you're building an engine, new pistons, new rods, one of the things you do is you put a single ring on the piston, you put the piston in the bore with the rod, you rotate the engine, you check for clearance. The rod could hit the block, the rod could hit the girdle, the piston could hit the piston squirter. These are things you check during mock-up. That way if you need to stop right then and clearance apart, you can do it. So we have the engine apart on the bench, fair share of problems, some new stuff learned through Hans with his SR20 experience. So we're gonna get this engine over to Mazworx. Mark Mazworowski is an SR20 specialist. He's got a ton of experience with these engines, and he's gonna get all this machine work straightened out. So the next time you see this engine, it's gonna be clean, ready to assemble. We'll screw it back together on video and share that with you. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.